Something unexpected happened inside that hearing room. Something subtle, quiet, almost easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. One question, just a single straightforward question, stopped the Attorney General cold. And it wasn't a complicated legal theory or a partisan trap. It was the simplest question a nation's top law enforcement official should answer without hesitation. Will you comply with the budget authorization law? The pause, the shift, the way her answer bent instead of standing firm. That was the moment everything changed. Senator Chris Van Hollen didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand. He didn't threaten. He simply asked a question rooted in the most basic principle of government.
So the second point I wanted to raise had to do with the prosecution of hate crimes, and I share your vigor in wanting to go after and prosecute hate crimes. I would just point out that the budget that you submitted zeroes out funding for 3 of the DOJ hate crimes programs. The hate crimes training program, Shepard Bird hate crimes, the Javara Hire No Hate Act, and the community approaches to advancing justice. So I hope you'll work with the committee if we seek to restore funding for those programs.
Yes, Senator, I just pulled up the details of those 3. Let me see. I'd be happy to discuss those with you further.
Good. And finally, I want to go back.
All 3 of those.
Thank you. I want to go back to the issues of grant determinations, because I think there continues to be some confusion between grants that had already been obligated that were withheld. And to my knowledge, there are about 400 of those still pending. It'd be helpful to get from your team if you have a different number. And then there's what we call notices for information, which relates to notices for future grant awards in this current fiscal year.
Yes, there is a difference.
And so I understood your earlier testimony to say, with respect to the notices, you the department plan to issue those very shortly. Is that right?
Yeah, and Senator, yes, you are correct on that. We notified the affected grantees and members of Congress regarding the terminations and how to appeal. That was the $811 million of grants that were initially terminated in 2025. We're also talking about upcoming ones as well.
Right. So I want to leave this hearing with some clarity on this issue. So when it comes to the notices of funding opportunities, because the clock is ticking on this fiscal year, do you and the Department of Justice intend to quickly notify people of those opportunities going forward?
Yes, Senator Van Hollen, as I said earlier, and it will be done on a rolling basis, but yes, within the coming weeks, we are absolutely doing that, yes.
And so finally, on On the other category, which are the grants that had been previously obligated, I do have concerns, Madam Attorney General, with the idea that the way we're going to get them to stop being withheld is members of Congress calling. I appreciate the invitation, and I will look to see if we've been hearing from people. But this category of grants relates to people who already went through the process and already had those grants obligated, and they're currently being held. So my question to you is, can you tell us how many are still being held today? And I don't like the idea that in order for somebody to get their withheld grant unheld, that they have to call a member of Congress. That should be, so how many are left? Do you know? How many of these grants are?
I don't know exactly, Senator, but I know many of them are the subject of ongoing litigation, so I wouldn't be able to speak of that in detail in this forum anyway.
Well, maybe just a follow-up, because it would be helpful to try to narrow the scope of this. Again, my understanding, and this was the subject of the letter I referenced earlier from a number of senators.
And I have not read that letter, but I will be happy to read that letter.
If you and your team could get back to us right away on that, because these are grants that, as the chairman knows, have been previously obligated, some many years ago, but frozen. And so the question is, how can we get them unfrozen? And I don't, members of Congress will call, but not everybody, can just call up their member of Congress or thinks of calling their member of Congress. We need a process that's fair to everybody. I hope you'd agree.
And actually, citizens have called as well.
Well, exactly. And so, exactly. So, but again, this is an ongoing issue. And I know colleagues on both sides of the aisle are hearing from it, folks. So, Mr. Chairman, unless something else comes up, that's it. And look forward to continuing the conversation.
It's not my intention to ask any topics or questions that cause you to come back again, but if I do.
Thank you, Senator Moran.
You're welcome, General.
Congress controls the purse. But the response he received didn't just reveal disagreement. It revealed uncertainty, tension, and a level of hesitation that raised eyebrows across the room. Because when the Attorney General of the United States cannot give a clear yes or no about following the law that governs federal spending, people start wondering what's really going on behind the scenes. And that's where the story begins. Bondi tried, at first, to give a simple assurance. We will comply with the budget law. But seconds later, she said something entirely different, that the Department of Justice didn't actually need congressional approval to proceed with its controversial ATF-DA merger. And that contradiction ignited the central mystery of this entire exchange. If the law requires congressional authorization, why insist the department can move without it? Why promise respect for the law while simultaneously claiming the law doesn't apply? That tension, tight, uncomfortable, and impossible to ignore, hung in the air for the rest of the hearing, because this wasn't a debate about policy. It wasn't about personalities. It was about power. Who controls it? Who checks it? Who respects its limits? And who doesn't? In the middle of all this, Bondi painted a picture of the merger as some kind of streamlined dream. Fewer bureaucratic layers, more agents on the streets, a united front under one umbrella. On the surface, it sounded efficient, cleaner, more effective. But beneath that polished explanation was a question she never fully answered. Does the DOJ have the legal authority to do this without Congress signing off? Van Hollen pushed. She shifted. He pressed. She adjusted. But the clarity never came. And that's the first sign that something wasn't lining up. But this hearing didn't stop with the merger. It turned into a deeper exploration of a Justice Department making decisions that felt increasingly disconnected from the normal processes of oversight and accountability. Because while the merger raised legal alarms, the next topic revealed something even more disturbing: the elimination of funding for 3 key hate crimes programs. Van Hollen brought the receipts that Bondi's own proposed budget zeroed out resources for hate crimes training and data collection, programs communities rely on, especially at a time when reports suggest hate-motivated incidents have been rising across the country. When challenged on this, Bondi didn't defend the cuts. She didn't explain the shift. She didn't even commit to reinstating the funding. She simply said she'd review the details. That was it. For many watching, that moment felt less like oversight and more like avoidance. And then came the quiet bombshell of the entire hearing. The part almost no one was talking about until Van Hollen forced it onto the record: the frozen grants. More than 400 grants, previously approved and obligated, some years ago, still sitting untouched, still locked up, still withheld from communities, nonprofits, law enforcement agencies, and victim support networks that had applied properly and been approved. These weren't hypothetical programs. These weren't future opportunities. They were decisions already made, money already promised, commitments already formalized. Yet the funds remained frozen. When asked why, Bondi pointed to ongoing litigation, a phrase that sounded like an answer but actually raised even more questions. Because Van Hollen's concern wasn't just why the grants were stuck. It was the disturbing idea that the only way to unfreeze them was for a member of Congress to personally make a call. In other words, the process wasn't automatic. It wasn't transparent. It wasn't fair. It was selective. That's when he said the line that defined the entire exchange. Not everybody can just call their member of Congress. The hearing room fell silent. Because this wasn't just about money. This was about access, power, equity, and whether the Justice Department was managing funds impartially or politically. Bondi didn't have an exact number for how many grants were still frozen. She didn't have a timeline for when they'd be released. She didn't offer clarity. And that's what made the moment so striking. For all the talk about efficiency and safety and bureaucratic reform, the basic question, where is the money that was already promised, remained unanswered. What Van Hollen did next revealed the scale of the problem. He reminded her that many of these grants had been frozen for years. Years. Programs stalled. Community safety plans delayed. Research projects suspended. Local government initiatives left on ice. And no one could get a clear answer as to why. Bondi said citizens had called too. As if that made the situation better. But it didn't. That it made it clearer. The process wasn't working. And the people who were supposed to receive federally approved funds had been left waiting without transparency or explanation. At this point, the exchange had transformed. It wasn't just about the merger or the budget. It wasn't even about the hate crimes programs anymore. It had become a window into something far bigger. A Justice Department whose internal decisions were creating confusion, halting programs, and eroding the trust that communities depend on. Because when federal grants can be arbitrarily frozen, when long-standing programs can be erased from the budget without explanation, when a major reorganization can be pushed forward without clear legal authority, and when the Attorney General cannot give a straight answer about whether her department will follow appropriations law, people start asking questions. Big ones. And that's where the deepest part of this story lies. Van Hollen wasn't trying to catch Bondi. He wasn't trying to score points. He was trying to understand how the department was making decisions, and why so many of those decisions seemed to bypass the normal safeguards that exist to protect fairness, transparency, and constitutional balance. Because Congress's power over the federal budget isn't optional. It isn't a suggestion. It's written directly into the structure of American governance. If the executive branch can move ahead without that approval, it sets a precedent that reaches far beyond this single merger. That's why this exchange matters. Not because of politics, because of power, because of law, because of trust. If the Attorney General can reorganize federal law enforcement agencies without congressional authorization, what stops future administrations from doing the same, or worse, without oversight? If community grants can be frozen indefinitely with no answer, how do local programs survive? If hate crimes programs can vanish quietly, who fills the gap for victims who rely on them? These aren't theoretical questions. They are real-world consequences that impact people in ways they can feel immediately. Throughout the hearing, Van Hollen kept returning to the same theme: clarity. He wanted clear numbers, clear decisions, clear commitments, clear respect for the law. And repeatedly, he received answers that were vague, shifting, or incomplete. But the most unsettling part wasn't what was said. It was what wasn't. Because a Justice Department unsure about its own legal boundaries, a reorganization moving forward without firm authorization, critical programs dropped from the budget without explanation, millions in grants left frozen with no public timeline. These patterns paint a picture that makes lawmakers on both sides nervous. Now, to be fair and responsible, it's important to say this. There is no confirmed evidence of intentional wrongdoing, no confirmed proof of political retaliation, no verified reports of deliberate stonewalling. But there is confusion, there is inconsistency, and there are legitimate questions that deserve transparent answers. And that's what made this hearing so significant. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't heated. No shouting. No theatrics. It was something far more telling. A calm, methodical probing of a department whose internal decisions weren't adding up. A spotlight on a leadership approach that felt improvised, reactive, or hidden behind technicalities. The power of the moment came from how plain it was, how honest the questions were, and how carefully Bondi tried to navigate them. Because when a simple question like, "Will you comply with the budget authorization law?" becomes difficult to answer, it forces everyone watching to wonder why. This hearing wasn't just oversight. It was accountability. A reminder that even the highest offices aren't immune to scrutiny. A reminder that the law isn't a suggestion. A reminder that transparency isn't optional. And a reminder that public trust depends on clear, consistent, lawful leadership. If you want more deep dive breakdowns like this, videos that cut through the noise and reveal what's really happening behind these congressional exchanges, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Because understanding these moments is the only way to hold leaders accountable. And the only way to make sure the decisions shaping our country happen in the light, not behind closed doors.